This is Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon. Mitch LaFon.
Welcome to this episode of Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon. Joining me on the phone from the Black Star Riders and Think Lizzy, it is guitarist Scott Gorham. The new album is Another State of Grace. But before that, before we get to Think Lizzy and Black Star Riders, which is one of my favorite bands, I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorite bands, Kiss, of course. There's a new book out called Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked by author Greg Prato. And Greg is on the phone. Bonjour, Greg. How are you?
Howdy, Mitch. How are you doing? It's great to hear your voice again.
Yes, and I love your books. And you've, of course, tackled Kiss or Kiss-related stuff before. You did the Eric Carr book, which, of course, we all love Eric Carr. Before we get talking about Scott Gorham and Think Lizzy, because somebody's told me, I think you're a big fan, right?
Yes, I love Think Lizzy. Back when I was in high school here in the States, Think Lizzy, it was back in the late 80s. Think Lizzy, no one really knew about them besides The Boys Are Back in Town and Jailbreak, but I dug deeper. And as a result, Black Rose is one of my favorite rock studio albums of all time. And I also love Johnny the Fox. And without a doubt, one of my favorite all-time live rock albums is the Live and Dangerous album. I put that up there with Kiss Alive and Cheap Trick at Budokan and all those great classic live albums.
All those great ones. And, of course, Black Rose, 40 years this year, 1979. So before we talk Kiss, have you ever written a Think Lizzy book?
I never have, but I would indeed like to one day since I'm such a big fan of theirs. That would be
great.
Definitely a topic I'd be interested in.
Good. So let's talk about Take It Off now. A lot has been made over the years about Kiss and makeup, and when you go to a show these days, you will hear Rock and Roll All Night, and you'll hear Detroit Rock City, and you'll hear Shout It Out Loud. All this stuff that was written in the 1970s, but we sort of have this lost era, right?
Right.
Your book covers this lost era. Talk to me about this thought you have about going, okay, you know what? We know 1974 to 1979 or what. I'm going to talk about that other stuff. Tears Are Falling, Crazy, Crazy Nights, Hide Your Heart. And I have to say, when I last saw Kiss in Montreal on August 16th, they played Crazy Nights, and it was the highlight of the year. I had never seen the song played live, and I was like, oh my God, look at that. Talk to me about that era and what sort of drew you to write an entire book, not just, hey, I'm going to talk about it in a tweet.
Well, it seems like the majority of Kiss books that are out there, a lot of them with the major ones that are put out through Gene and Paul, the main focus or the people that we're hearing the most from are Gene and Paul. So with this book, I spoke to some other people because I figured with some of the past Kiss books, such as like Kiss Behind the Mask and several other ones, like you were saying before, the focus is the makeup era, but the non-makeup era does not get that much focus and attention. And when it does, it's really just Gene and Paul, but we never really hear a lot from Bruce. We didn't hear that much from Eric, who's sadly now deceased, so we can't hear from him. But, I just figured why not try to speak to some other people that haven't been interviewed at length about this era. Because growing up as a teenager here in the States in the 80s, like I just said before, Kiss at that time was still my favorite band. I saw them on the Crazy Nights tour. I saw them on the Hot in the Shade tour, and I saw Fruity's Comet open up for Iron Maiden on the Seventh Son tour. So I was able to see a lot of shows, and they were still my favorite band at that point. I have to admit that since then, I'm really, at this point, really just a Kiss 74 through 79 type guy. But I think that each of the non-makeup era albums, there's at least several songs I think that are still solid songs. And if you were to strip them of their 80s glossy pop production, I think they would probably stand up very well to a lot of their 70s classics, songs such as Not for the Innocent. And, there's actually, like I said,
A Million to One. Come on, that's a great one.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, well, honestly, that track I think stands up perfectly on its own because, to the best of my knowledge, wasn't Lick It Up recorded. They weren't sure if they were taking off the makeup or not at that point, so for instance, Gene was still singing, I think, from the demon persona and that sort of thing.
Yeah, a little bit. There was sort of an indecision, I think, but I'll quickly remind the folks that Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked, is out November 19th. It is currently available, or pre-orders are available on Amazon.com. So check that out. But what I find interesting in the book here is, like you said, we've heard the stories through the Ace Frehley lens and through the Paul Stanley lens and the Gene Simmons lens, you know. But you've got KK Downing of Judas Priest. Now that one sort of shocked me. I'm like, whoa, what does KK have to do? Because he's got his own story, you know, Judas Priest. But you've also got Charlie Benante, a avowed Kiss fanatic, you know, Chris Jericho, Derek Sherinian, who of course was hiding and playing keyboards on the Revenge tour. So you've got some great stuff in there. I want to ask you about this one here, Chapter 12, where you start talking about Carnival of Souls. Mm. The first line is about, well, you know what, Kiss through the 80s were seemingly chasing trends, and a lot of the people in the book are sort of mirroring that and saying, yeah, you know what, they were chasing Bon Jovi, they were chasing Def Leppard, they were chasing. Is that the perception you have as well? Because if you were to ask me what my perception was, it'd be like, yeah, Kiss in the 70s were the leaders, and in the 80s they were follow the leaders.
Yeah, I would say that that's a fair assumption if I think about that. I mean, and also as far as just the way that Kiss looked at the time as well, you could definitely say that they mirrored the Bon Jovis and the Motley Crues, you know, at the time. I mean, Paul Stanley, I think, could definitely get away with it because he was always kind of like a flamboyant, showy type guy. But it was kind of embarrassing around the Asylum era when Gene Simmons was getting dressed in all these Vegas-y type wardrobes and feminine type makeup, because you'd read these things with him where he would talk about maybe like several years before or even several years later, where he says in the early years of Kiss, they were trying to dress like the New York Dolls, but that it didn't really work for them because they were like these huge guys and it looked like linebackers in like drag. So here they are in the 80s, but they were doing the same thing that they supposedly shied away from early on. So that always struck me as kind of strange that they couldn't see that, you know, Gene should have stuck to the whole, like, you know, demon type persona. I mean, he could have done that because he found it when it came to 1992. He, you know, had the goatee and started looking like Tom Araya from Slayer. So he should have just been doing that, I think, all along. That would have been a much more comfortable standpoint, I think, for Gene.
Yeah, the 85 Asylum look was not great for him. Now, you've, of course, written books that are not just about, you know, classic rock and Kiss. You've focused a lot also on 90s metal. You have The Survival of the Fittest, heavy metal in the 90s, a book about Mr. Bungle or Faith No More, I should say. Talk to me a little bit about your love of 90s music, because you also have this new Soundgarden book coming out called Dark and Blue, the Soundgarden Story. Talk to me about that, because you know, when you look at me personally and you talk to me about 90s and you start naming these bands, generally I nod off and go, oh, yeah, you're great. But you embraced it. And so kudos to you for that, because, listen, I'm a classic rock guy now. I mean, I liked my Bon Jovis and I liked my Kisses and I liked my Cheap Tricks and that other stuff. You know, I heard Smell Like Teen Spirit and I went, smells like I'm out of here. You know? Talk to me about that and this new sort of dark, black and blue, the Soundgarden storybook, which, by the way, folks, is on Amazon right now. You don't have to pre-order this one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's for sale as a Kindle download and also a paperback. As far as music, what I listen to everything. I firmly believe that every single genre of music, there's at least several artists that are valid and also very good. So you can name any kind of genre, and I could probably name several bands or artists that I'm a fan of. And I really did enjoy the 90s, which I'm surprised you weren't a fan of a lot of those grunge bands, because a lot of them list 70s Kiss as a very big influence. And it seemed like a lot of those bands, production-wise, were modeling their sound after the early live-sounding Kiss albums like Rock and Roll Over and also Dressed to Kill. They were trying to get that live sound again. So I'm surprised that you're not a big fan of like bands like Alice in Chains and also Soundgarden.
Well, I got to tell you, as I've gotten older, I've discovered two things about what makes me tick in terms of music. I like melody, and you know, I like Metallica. And if you listen to Metallica in terms of thrash metal, there's a lot of melody going through those songs. It's not just a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo. And I like vocalists. I need a vocalist that has something that speaks to my ear, and I just found that a lot of the 90s guys were either too aggressive, too atonal, too irritating. And I just could never, and I know people are going, well, quick, Chris Cornell, no, Elaine Stan. I'm going, yeah, well, my ears didn't like it. And that's not a disrespect to them in the larger sense that I'm glad people like it because I love that people buy music. You want to buy music? I don't care if it's Cher or Soundgarden or Madonna or Bananarama or Kiss or as long as you're buying.
Right.
I'm in.
Right, I understand.
But my ears just don't like certain sounds. And
right.
the 90s stuff, I tried. Listen, I tried to listen to Soundgarden. I tried listening a little bit to Nirvana, because at the beginning, at least up here, the Much Music Power Hour would put those bands, there'd be a Rat video and a Judas Priest video and then there'd be a Soundgarden video. And I would just be like, yeah, not working. But,
right, I understand.
And listen, I saw Guns N' Roses on their Not in This Lifetime tour, and they started doing a tribute to Chris by playing Black Hole Sun. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I go to the bathroom. I couldn't take it. So, but listen, for fans who can take it and who love it, books out, you can read about that.
And also I was going to say too, if you're a fan of metal, you would probably enjoy the Soundgarden book because they did all new interviews with Phil Anselmo from Pantera and also Dave Weindorf from Monster Magnet. And you also mentioned Guns N' Roses. Soundgarden opened up several legs of the Use Your Illusion tour, and that's all discussed at length in this book. So, and also, of course, who could forget the Voivod Faith No More Soundgarden tour in 1990? That's also discussed at length as well.
Voivod is homeschool. That's my backyard. Now, you also sometimes step out of the rock stuff, and you write books about sports. You've done one about the New York Islanders, and you've done some baseball ones too, New York Yankees. As we enter the new hockey season, we're September 2019, October the season starts. Are you still a huge hockey fan, and are you still rooting for the somewhat dysfunctional New York Islanders?
All three of my main teams that I root for are very dysfunctional. I'm talking about the New York Mets, the New York Jets, and of course the New York Islanders. Those are my three top teams, and they've provided me a lifetime worth of heartache and also definitely heartbreak.
Wow. I think this is the first time I've heard an actual human cop to being a New York Jets fan. That's
well, you know what? Let me just quickly, I'll tell you the reason why I am a fan of those three teams is I just started following sports in the early 80s. And at that point, all three of those teams were local on Long Island where I live. The Jets and the Mets shared Shea Stadium at the time, and the Islanders were at Nassau Coliseum. Since then, the Islanders are now in Brooklyn, and the Jets, of course, moved to Jersey, and the Mets are the only team that's still playing on Long Island in Queens.
Oh, see, so there you go. Before we get over to Scott Gorham of Thin Lizzy and Black Star Riders fame, do go to Amazon.com and just type in Greg Prato, Prato. You will see all his books from King's X to the Yacht Rock book to Grunge is Dead, thankfully. Primus, Touch. The thankfully is my thing. It's not in his title. But Greg, thank you. And shall we gander off and wander off and listen to what Scott had to say?
Yes, and before we do so, I just wanted to quickly point out about this book, Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked. When you asked me how it's different from other Kiss books, I tried to do some different things with this book. So like you mentioned, KK Downing, talking about why a lot of the bands such as Kiss and Ozzy and Judas Priest softened their sound in the 80s. He talks about that. We also have Martin Popoff talking about we go year by year from 1983 through 1996, because that's the whole era when Kiss was unmasked. We go year by year. He talks about some of the top metal albums each year. So we kind of compare and contrast to what Kiss's album was at that point. And also an interesting thing I did is I interviewed Catherine Turman, who is a co-writer of the book called Louder Than Hell, which is a great heavy metal history book. And I talked to her about misogyny in metal in the 80s, because that's something that I don't think has really ever been discussed at length, because you could definitely say that some of Gene's lyrics at the time, like lyrics such as Dance All Over Your Face and also Burn Bitch Burn, could definitely be considered misogynistic. So we talk about that a little bit. But my personal favorite interview of the whole book was Mitch LaFon talking about the Smashers Thrashers and Hits album.
Yeah, you see, wasn't that a great moment? And by the way, Burn Bitch Burn, misogynistic. Oh my God. Boy, that Animalized album, I am not a fan of. I like a couple of songs, but I don't know. There was just, I think the cover turned me off, to be honest. I don't know. There was something just, But, yeah, boy, oh boy, there is no Pulitzer for Burn, Bitch, Burn, let me tell you.
Right, I agree.
And on that, folks, here is the one, the only guitarist extraordinaire, Scott Gorham. We are speaking with guitarist Scott Gorham. The new album is Another State of Grace. Of course, the band is Black Star Riders, which everyone knows is one of my favorite bands. And I'm a big proponent of Black Star, and I think fans get tired of hearing me talk about you and Thunder and Gothard and all those European bands. But I love you guys, and I think you need to be bigger and how can I say, just have a higher profile in North America for all three bands, because it's just honest rock and roll.
Mitch, I so agree with you. We need to be much, much bigger everywhere. If I do say so myself. It is true. Black Star Riders, I mean, we've got quite a following over here in the United Kingdom and pretty much throughout Europe. America, it's tough to get when you're a new band. It is very tough to get a foothold, and what it takes is a band like ourselves. We've got to get back over to America, Canada, all those places over there, and just play more. So hopefully after this next European stint, we'll have things booked up so we can come over and see you guys.
I certainly hope so. And I did my part last year. I got you booked in a gig in Montreal, and everybody had a great time. So good for that.
You see that? We can't even take a day off. Hey, somebody get us a gig somewhere.
That's right, on that Judas Priest tour. Okay, so let's talk about this, because I have been a fan from the very beginning. And, you had Marco Mendoza, and you had Damon Johnson and others, and the band has changed. Talk to me about these lineup changes. Is it a struggle to sort of keep a lineup together, or is it a refresh, a renouveau, as we say, to get new blood? Because what Christian brings to the band is sort of a high octane, high energy, youthful kind of approach. Talk to me about these lineup changes, and how do you feel about the band now?
Well, I know it's daunting for some people when you've been playing with a certain member for, I don't know, X amount of time, right? But I've been through this scenario many, many times, being with, the band Thin Lizzy for so many years. I mean, to me, it seemed like, and it's the old joke, is, there was a revolving door on the right-hand side of the stage constantly. I would look over and think, well, what's that guy's name? So I'm completely comfortable with all of that. I look at it as just kind of, fresh blood, fresh energy, coming into the band. To the outgoing member, thank you very much for what you've done. Good luck. But something, the world keeps turning, it keeps spinning. And if you, actually believe in what you're doing, the world will keep on spinning and you just keep going, So I loved, everybody that's been and is in the band right now. But when you truly believe in something, you just keep it going.
You do.
Kind of no matter what, the train keeps rolling.
Which, by the way, would be a great song to cover. But ultimately, then, right? It's a great song. Ultimately, is the band Scott and Ricky? Like, if we don't have Scott and Ricky, does it make a difference? I mean, is that sort of the core that has to be there? Are you the sort of the Steven Tyler and Joe Perry of Black Star Riders? You two?
Well, I've never even thought about it in those kind of terms, but I guess so. Ricky and I we're such good friends. We started this whole thing out together. I personally asked Ricky to join Thin Lizzy when I fired Lizzy back up again, because I knew what he could do. I knew what he could do lyrically also. He really did remind me of kind of a youthful Phil Lynott with the just the way his thoughtfulness on the lyrics. He actually tells a story. It's not you're not just getting rhyming Moon and June kind of lyrics. This guy sits down and he really thinks about what he's going to sing about. He's often said, if I don't believe in what I'm singing, I just can't sing the song. I can't do it. I got to believe in it, and I believe him when he says that. So when you read Ricky's lyrics, you know that he 100% believes in everything that he's singing. So yeah, Ricky and I were great partners. We're great friends. I think that maybe if either one of us wanted to head off into the sunset, it all might crumble, or it might keep going ahead. It's like I said, Mitch, I haven't even thought about the band in those kind of terms, but hey, we'll see in the future what happens. Right now, everybody's really happy with what's going on, and the new guys in the band, and the energy, and the new album. So yeah, what can I tell you on that one?
Yeah, well, Another State of Grace is the new album, and it's out now. Listen, I'm a fan. I've got everything plus the B-sides and the Japanese imports. I'm a nut. But you did mention Thin Lizzy. The band did, of course, play some shows in 2019. You brought back Damon Johnson in his role of Thin Lizzy, not in Black Star. Mm-hmm. Is that something that we will see going forward, where in 2020 you'll hit a couple of European festivals, or maybe does that band sort of still exist in perpetuity, or at some point do you say, all right, 2020 is the farewell tour, 2021, how do you sort of see that?
Well, I'm never going to say, this is totally the end of Thin Lizzy. But I will say, I'm not going to bring Thin Lizzy out to fill up the bank account, for God's sakes. If you think about it, like you mentioned in this year, we only did 4 shows, and that was it. I was determined that this was not going to be a bankrolling kind of situation. I was there. We put it together the Black Rose album was 40 years old this year, and Phil has been gone for 30 years. So I wanted to, pay homage to kind of, both of those things, but not to do it in a really extended situation, because my main thing right now really is Black Star Riders. But so that's what I mean. For me to bring out Thin Lizzy again, it will be for a special. It will be for a reason. It's not, for financial purposes or anything like that, which I can imagine maybe other people do, but I kind of refuse to do that with Thin Lizzy.
Well, hey, you've got Chinatown's 40th next year, so that sounds like a good reason to me.
Well, you never know. I mean, I know there's probably a little bit of talk about it right now. We'll see what happens. I know that there were Lizzy fans out there in other countries that were a little cheesed up that that we didn't bring it over to them. So we might relent and go and visit maybe a couple other countries with like you say, the Chinatown album, because I personally really like that album. I thought there was a lot of really great songs off of that one. So, but it's tough doing those kind of situations. It's like with the Black Rose album. I can remember sitting in Paris in the studio with Phil, listening to a kind of a mini mix playback, and leaning over to him and saying, "Well, that one's never going to see the light of day on stage, right?" And he would nod his head and agree, right? So there was about, 4 or 5 songs that never, ever saw the light of day. So now you're going out there and you're playing these songs for the very first time. You have no idea what, the audience reaction is going to be with these songs that have never been played. So that is a little, what's going to happen here. But I tell you, what did happen for me is on a fair few of those songs that didn't get played, after we played them, I kept wondering, why did we never play these songs live? These are actually really cool songs to play live on stage, So, it's probably going to be the same thing if we go out and do Chinatown. It's probably going to be the same thing there, there will be several songs that we never played live on stage, and if we do it and we learn all this stuff, I will probably walk out and go, "Wow, man, why didn't we play that one or that one?" So in that respect, doing these, we're going to play the Black Rose album from start to finish. It's a daunting thing, but in the end of it, it's pretty amazing when you get done with it, know that you've done it, and realize that there actually really were some pretty cool things on each album.
There was. And that, well, you know what? I was going to ask you about the name, but let me ask you about this. And since you mentioned that you would sort of have these discussions where you'd go, okay, this song is album. You've played almost every song live at some point during the band's career. Do you approach an album now with everything has to be sort of stage ready, or do you still have that sort of mentality of, no, that's going to be a good, album cut, and we'll how do you sort of approach the final product, or the writing, I guess, is the ultimate question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think we've ever written anything or recorded anything saying to ourselves, well, ultimately, this is just going to be a deep cut. You always want to say to yourself at some point during that song, either the writing process or the recording process, yes, we will be able to get up and perform that song. Nothing's too impossible. We haven't layered this song so ridiculously that we can't reproduce this on the stage. We try to do that with Lizzy a lot too. Not put in too many things that you could not reproduce the next day on stage. So, and once again, there's no real great, massive discussions on that part of it. I think that's just sort of a DNA thing that everything that you write, you kind of visualize that being played on stage rather than just sitting in the the album jackets, covered full of dust and will never get played. So hopefully, and you're right. I think we have probably played at some point every Black Star Rider song on at least the 3 previous albums. On this one, I know for a fact there's only 9 tracks on this album, but we're absolutely doing 5 of them straight out of the bag on this next couple of tours. So who knows? Maybe the other 4 will at some point get dusted off, and we'll try those too.
Now mine has 11 because I bought the Japanese bonus version because I invest. I have it right in front. In fact,
I like you. I say
it. This sound is actually me flipping around the CD here. The bonus track here, "Candidate for the Heartbreak." Candidate for Heartbreak. That's what it says. Good song. All right, let me ask you this. I know that you've been asked in the past about why did you become Black Star Riders and not stay Thin Lizzy. We know you had to change.
Right.
But it was a difficult path to do that because the easy money is go with the brand, go with the Coca-Cola, go with the Kiss, go.
Absolutely.
Is that now, looking back, something that you are still enthusiastic about, or do you sometimes look at yourself and say, we could have just gone with the brand because there's pros and cons, right?
Yeah,
the shows
there's more money in it. There's more money in it.
Well, that's the pro, the money, the merchandising, the everything. The cons are fans going, well, it's not Thin Lizzy because Phil, but ultimately it's the music business and it's about putting money in the bank. So to talk to me about that decision, and in hindsight, is there no, we did the right thing 100%, or fuck, I should have just taken the money?
Well, I can tell you right now, I have never regretted that decision. And that kind of one of the big reasons is that, we wrote 17 songs, thinking maybe allegedly, I don't know what, that we were going to do this under, the brand, under Thin Lizzy, until I just couldn't take it any longer. And I just had to tell everybody that was not going to happen. Right. But, and as soon as you make that decision, whatever height that you're at, with the brand name, you're going to be dropping down a fair few notches when you start this new thing. Everybody does. You got to work your way back up. And we all knew that this was going to be hard work. Now we got to start from the bottom. Nobody knows these songs. Nobody's familiar with it. Tighten your buckles, belt buckles, and get ready for the ride, because here we go. And that's pretty much the attitude that we had. It wasn't, oh my God, we're not going to be making as much money. We won't be able to do this or that. I think it was more of the challenge of the whole thing. I think we can do this. Let's get in there and do it, because I think we can do it. Not really realizing how much work there was involved, right? But I don't regret that side of it either. It's been a ride. It's been a great ride, and we're still on it. We're still on the ride. So we're 4 albums. I mean, we didn't even think that we were going to get past album number 1. Are we going to be able to record album number 2? And now here we are. We're on our 4th album. I can see us doing probably a 5th sometime in the next couple of years. So no, I don't regret it. And I do get my Lizzy chops off. Every once in a couple of years, I can get out there and play the song. So it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, it is, and it's probably great not to have fans go, well, Dancing with the Wrong Girl is a great song, but it's just not a Thin Lizzy song. So, and
right.
It's like, yeah, all right, okay, shut up, right?
Well, at that point, you were always going to be, compared against history, right? And it's kind of tough to wrestle with history. And what's the point in that? That it's already been done, and I did it with my friend Phil. So let's take the road left. Or right, yeah. Or whatever you want to do. Or wherever. Let's go down that path for a while and see where it takes us.
And you're doing great. Now, we're 4 albums in. When you do play, when you open up for Judas Priest, when you're on the road, on occasion you'll throw in a Thin Lizzy song and so on and so forth. Do you see yourself as we need to have the next album be a studio album? Or at this point, do we start thinking, hey, you know what? A live album that sort of shows what we are, who this lineup is, or... Is that something that you've started considering at this point?
You know something? We have not, but since you've mentioned it, I think it's a good idea, because it's a great thing we have going for us. Is this is really a kick-ass live band? There's no doubt about that. Everybody knows what they're doing. The songs are great. I think we can come up with a great live album. So yeah, that should definitely be on the cards, at some point, in the future. Maybe it'll be with, this lineup here, with, Christian and Chad's, Robbie, myself, Ricky, I think it would be a good lineup, a good candidate for a live album. So yeah, that's great food for thought. So we'll definitely be thinking about that.
Well, I think it's a great way to represent, and I think some of the fans that maybe weren't there at the beginning could say, "Oh, hey, I didn't know about this song. Okay." Get into it. Just real quick, we did mention Black Rose, its 40th anniversary, which was 2019, so it was 1979. Talk to me a little bit about that album and the importance for the band and for you. And, it's got Waiting for an Alibi, which is one of the all-time greats. How important or not important was it in the band's career? Was the success sort of already entrenched and you were moving forward? Or was this one where you had to say, all right, if we don't get this right, sort of historically, what was the context for you?
Well, historically, I do. I think it's a fairly important album for Thin Lizzy. There were a lot of great songs that came off of that album. It was the only album that Gary Moore was on. He couldn't see himself lasting the course for any longer, right? So it was nice to do one with Gary. I know that Gary and Phil were great friends. On and off, they had a real love-hate relationship with each other, for God's sakes, for years. But historically, that's kind of hard for me to talk about. I think that's more of a fan kind of thing. They're gonna, either have to tell me or you what they historically think of, the status of any album that we did. I find it hard to really kind of think in those terms of what other people are thinking, what are the, best albums or best tracks or whatever. So I don't really have a great answer for that one, so I don't know what to tell you on that, Mitch.
You don't know what to say. Well, okay, let me help you. Best song, Waiting for an Alibi, and best guest performance, Huey Lewis. That's terrific.
Huey, yeah, he was a support act for us for a couple of tours, and I remember going out into the auditorium, and they were sound checking, and I guess their singer was late or something, so Huey walked up to the mic and he started singing. Now, we didn't even know that Huey could sing, because all he was doing was playing harmonica with I can't remember the band that he was in right now.
Was it the News?
No, it wasn't the News.
It was?
No. Oh God, now I feel terrible. Right. Anyway,
no. Well, I'm going to help you out.
I went back into our dressing room and I said to Phil, I said, "Have you ever seen that harmonica player Huey? Have you ever heard him sing?" And of course he said no. And I said, "Come on out here and check this out." And Huey was out there still singing, and it was kind of from that point on we kind of really hit Huey, like, "What are you doing playing harmonica, man? You should be out there singing, or at least have your own band or whatever." And sure enough, the next thing we heard about him, it was Huey Lewis in the News, So I think Phil really got to him to get away from the harmonica and get onto the microphone. So nice one, Phil.
Nice, yeah. And according to this, his band before was called Clover, and their albums were produced by Mutt Lange.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Hey, Huey, I'm sorry for forgetting the name.
Clover and Mutt Lange. Wow, there you go.
What a nice combo there, huh?
Yep, and it says he was known as Bluesy Louie. What was his name? He said Bluesy Lewis was his name. There you go.
Because of the blues harmonica, right? Okay.
Yeah, of course. Just real quick here before we wrap up with Black Star Riders and Other State of Grace. Talk to me a little bit about the songwriting process. Is it pretty much Ricky Warwick runs off and does all the lyrics, and then you come back to the band and you and Robbie and sort of figure, okay, what music goes here, or is it music first, or does everybody just bring in a song and how do you sort of figure out what song goes where and who writes it and what credits? And
yeah, that's another good question, but it's all of that jumbled mess together, right? But with this one, we did it in a completely different way. This was written in a way that I didn't even think was possible or should be possible. Christian is one of those, Pro Tools guys, right? He's always got his Pro Tools with him on tour and in his hotel room, wherever, right? And he says, "Listen, I've got an idea here. I did this on one other album and it came out great, right?" And the reason he was bringing this idea up is because we all live thousands of miles away from each other. And we really only had 2 weeks to rehearse and record Another State of Grace, which is always shocking. I remember back in the day, you had 3 months to make a studio. Now it's down to 2 weeks. So Christian says, "How about this? You guys, put all your ideas down, riffs, chord progressions, harmony, guitar harmony things, whatever you got, record it on your iPhone, iPad, whatever, and send it over to me. And I'll start on my downtime. I'll start trying to glue all of these different parts together and put them into song form. And then I'll send them back to you guys and see what you think, right?" And I immediately went, "I don't know. That's not, I don't know. I like to be in the room, eyeball to eyeball with the guys in the band, duking it out for the parts." And you say, "Well, it's actually really a time saver, because once we get into rehearsal, that's time is going to be eaten up, working on arrangements." I said, "Well, okay. All right. I get it." So, I send in, I think I had 20 ideas that I sent over to him, and Ricky had 25. And yes, Ricky does write all the lyrics, that's his stomping ground, and nobody tries to step over that line. That's his guy there. So that's what we did. And like I said, I sent my 20. Ricky sent his 20. Everybody in the band had a few ideas. They sent them in. And true to his word, Christian sat there on the back lounge of the bus and started gluing all this stuff together. And he would, start sending song ideas to each and every one of us. And a lot of it, you're going, yeah, that sounds great. I get that. Or, I don't know, maybe we could work on that. Maybe if you shifted that to that kind of conversation, right? But to the point where after a couple of months, I think he had something like 15 or 16 songs of our ideas all glued together, right? And what it did, it saved so much time that, when we finally all met up in Los Angeles, we all kind of had a basic idea of where each song was going. Obviously there were going to be fixes here and a fix there or a fix over there or whatever, right? But it just saved so much time that when we finally got in the studio to start recording this stuff, everybody knew what they were doing. We knew, what direction this song was going in and why and what the reasons were. And that's why I think it, came out the way it did, because now we could afford more time of working on different sounds, or have a background singer come in and work with her, or a keyboard player and work with him. So it was a different way of working, and I really enjoyed it. From me thinking this is going to be a total disaster to me walking out of the studio going, wow, that was a great idea. That was really cool. And that's how we, put this last Black Star Writers, Another State of Grace album together.
Yeah, great album, which I have right in front of me.
Right.
You can hear it right there. And I'll finish on this. In terms of, is that sort of the biggest adjustment as a guy who's sort of a veteran of the scene? You've been playing since, 73, 74, at least professionally.
Yep.
Is it the recording process that has been sort of the biggest change for you, where you're not four on the floor with some guy going, all right, start it off, let's get this song done, and you're now doing email recording? Or what is sort of the biggest thing?
Well, that is a culture shock. There's no doubt about it. When you're, have done something like 20 albums and you're used to, spending a long period of time on each album, to be told, well, you've got 12 days, knowing that, once you start the track, you've got to finish it on that day, because tomorrow we're on to the next one. And we're going to start that, and we're going to finish that one. So that's a shock to the system. I will, cop to that one. So
does it? Well, I was going to say, does it remove the creativity? Because there's got to be points in the 70s and 80s where you sat there and you go, no, that's not the fill I'm hearing. No, that's not the solo I'm hearing. And then you get Waiting for an Alibi, and you go, effing perfect. Has that been removed from the process?
No, I get the question. I understand what you're saying. And, I think sometimes, because things are going at such a fast pace that you get done with one thing and you listen to the next thing, and you think, geez, if I would have had 10 more minutes on this or whatever, But something, there's always going to be those excuses. Even if you had 3 months in the studio, you would come back to it next month and go, if I had another week on this thing, I'd probably do it even better. So,
yeah.
There's something to be said for, on the spot, red button on, go man up, let's see what you got, So there's a positive and a negative for both sides of the argument.
Yeah, and I think some of the negative is sometimes you're sitting in the studio and you're getting a little bored, and then you have an extra drink or two, and then at some point you're like, oh, are we actually recording an album? I thought we were at a party. Sorry. So it cuts both ways.
Hey.
Shh, nobody drinks here. Scott, absolute pleasure. Always a pleasure. Black Star Writers, Another State of Grace is out now. And, of course, if you don't own All Hell Breaks Loose, The Killer Instinct, and Heavy Fire, you should. That's all I'm going to say. You should.
Exactly.
And get the Killer Instinct Deluxe Edition with the acoustic bonus disc or whatever, because that is fantastic. As we say in Montreal, merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, Scott. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mitch.
You're listening to Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon. Rock Talk.